Ilara did not know that the ghost of Soul had been hunting her for 300 days, or that her name, whispered once in mercy to a dying stranger, had become an obsession carved into the bones of the city's most dangerous predator. She had no idea that Kenji Sato's people had been quietly searching, sifting through hospital records and security footage, tracing the path of a girl who gave without asking for names. All Ilara knew was the weight pressing down on her chest, the one that made breathing feel like a betrayal of the space she occupied. A weight her family had placed there, brick by careful brick, until she'd learned to carry it like a second skin. The Sapphire Gala was supposed to be an honor. That's what the embossed invitation had said. Delivered to her tiny walk-up apartment 3 weeks ago with a note in her step-aunt's tight, angry script. "You will attend. You will not embarrass us." Now, standing at the edge of the marble ballroom, with its crystal chandeliers throwing fractured rainbows across the crowd, Ilara felt like a smudge on an otherwise perfect canvas. The teal silk dress she wore, vintage found in a thrift shop and carefully altered by her own trembling hands, clung to her body like a beautiful lie. It whispered elegance, but beneath it, she was still the girl her cousins called the charity case, the one who didn't quite fit into the family's relentless climb toward social perfection. Last week's wound was still fresh, a bruise that hadn't yet turned yellow. She'd been at the corner market, reaching for a carton of eggs, deet when she'd heard the voice behind her. "Still shopping in the bargain aisle, I see." Bianca. Her step-cousin had materialized like smoke, dressed in athleisure that cost more than Ilara's monthly rent, her lips curved in that particular smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Some of us have to budget," Ilara had replied quietly, not meeting her eyes. "Some of us shouldn't be at family events at all." Bianca had leaned closer, her perfume cloying and expensive. "You're an embarrassment, you know that? Every time you show up, people whisper. They wonder why we keep you around. Honestly, so do I." The words had landed like stones in still water, rippling outward, sinking deep. Ilara had left her basket and walked out, her vision blurred, her throat tight with the tears she refused to shed in public. Now, away in this ballroom full of Manhattan's elite, that same cousin was gliding toward her with Renee at her side, both of them sharks scenting blood in the water. Bianca wore black leather tonight, a dress that looked like it had been painted onto her body, every curve a weapon. Renee was draped in crimson silk, her dark skin glowing against the fabric, her expression one of bored cruelty. They moved as a unit, cutting through the crowd with the confidence of women who'd never been told they didn't belong anywhere. When they reached Ilara, Bianca's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Well, well," she said, her voice pitched just loud enough to draw attention from nearby guests. "Look who actually showed up. I told the security team to watch for you. We thought you might try to sneak in through the kitchen." Renee laughed. "Och, a sound like breaking glass." "That dress," she said, her gaze raking over Ilara with theatrical disgust. Is that polyester? At the Sapphire Gala?" "It's silk," Ilara managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Clearance silk, maybe?" Bianca stepped closer, invading Ilara's space with practiced aggression. Her finger came up, jabbing toward Ilara's chest like a blade. "Do you have any idea how this looks? You, standing here in your sad little thrift store costume, making us all look like we're running a charity for the pathetic and unwanted?" The words hit their mark with surgical precision. Ilara felt her face go hot, then cold. Around them, she could feel eyes turning, curiosity sharpening into something uglier. The wealthy guests were always hungry for drama, especially when it came served with class division and family cruelty. "I was invited," Ilara said, but her voice cracked on the last word. "Invited out of pity," Renee interjected, her tone almost bored. "Your mother married into this family, and we've been stuck with you ever since, a constant reminder that we're tied to this." She gestured vaguely at Ilara as if she were something distasteful found on the bottom of a shoe. Bianca leaned in closer, her breath hot against Ilara's ear. "Let me make this very clear because I'm tired of dancing around it. You don't belong here. You never have. You're not one of us. You're not family. You're a burden we're all too polite to cut loose." She pulled back, her voice rising just enough to ensure their audience caught every word. "You are unwanted here. Period." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the string quartet seemed to falter, the music dipping into a discordant note before recovering. Alara felt something inside her crack, a final structural beam giving way under too much weight. Her vision swam. Her hands trembled at her sides. She needed to leave, now. Before the tears came, before she gave them the satisfaction of watching her break completely. She turned, blindly seeking the nearest exit when she felt it. A shift in the air. A change so profound it was almost physical, like the moment before lightning strikes when every hair on your body stands at attention. The ballroom's chaotic energy, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the predatory small talk, all of it stuttered and died. It was a gaze, heavy, unblinking, absolutely focused, and it was aimed directly at her. Alara's breath caught. Slowly, against every instinct screaming at her to run, she turned toward the source. He stood at the far end of the ballroom, framed by an archway draped in shadow, and he was looking at her like she was the only person who existed in the entire glittering space. The man wore darkness like other men wore cologne. His suit was so black it seemed to absorb light, tailored with such precision it looked like a second skin over a body built for violence. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of presence that didn't demand attention so much as command it through sheer, inexorable force. His face was all sharp angles and brutal elegance, high cheekbones, a jaw that could have been carved from granite, and a mouth set in a line that suggested he'd forgotten how to smile, or perhaps had simply decided it was no longer necessary. But it was his eyes that held her captive. Even from across the vast expanse of marble and crystal, she could see they were pale. A gray so light it was almost silver, like winter ice catching moonlight. They were the eyes of a predator, cold and calculating, yet as they rested on her, something in them shifted. Recognition. Certainty. Something that looked almost like relief. The crowd had noticed him. How could they not? Conversations died mid-sentence. Women touched their throats nervously. Men straightened their spines and checked the exits. A ripple of tension spread outward from his position like a stone dropped in still water. And in the wake of that ripple, people moved away, creating space, offering deference without being asked. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd read about him in whispered articles and true crime forums, though she'd never seen his face. Kenji Sato, the ghost of soul, head of the White Lotus Syndicate, a man whose name was spoken in boardrooms and back alleys with equal parts terror and respect. And he was looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for a very, very long time. Then he moved. It wasn't a hurried motion. Kenji Sato didn't hurry, but each step he took was deliberate, purposeful, unstoppable. The crowd parted before him like a curtain being drawn back, people melting away from his path with the instinctive urgency of prey avoiding an apex predator. He didn't acknowledge them. His pale eyes never left Alara's face. 10 yards. 5. 3. Bianca's voice cut through the tension, shrill with confusion and the first edge of panic. What is... Renee grabbed her arm, her face gone pale beneath her makeup. "That's Kenji Sato," she hissed. "Shut up! Don't move!" But Bianca, ever the social climber, ever desperate to control every narrative, stepped forward. She'd smoothed her features into what she probably thought was a seductive smile, though it came across as desperate. "Mr. Sato," she purred, positioning herself between him and Alara. "What an unexpected honor. I'm Bianca Thorne, and this is my cousin Renee. We were just..." He didn't slow. He walked past her as if she were made of air. Bianca's mouth fell open. Renee took a half-step back, her survival instincts finally overriding her cruelty. Kenji stopped directly in front of Alara, so close she could smell him. Winter air and leather, something sharp like gunmetal, and beneath it all, something warm and inexplicably comforting. Up close, he was overwhelming. The scar bisecting his left eyebrow was a pale slash against his skin. His presence was a physical weight pressing against her, making the air feel thick and charged. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. His gaze moved over her face like he was committing every detail to memory, or perhaps confirming something he'd already memorized long ago. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate through her chest. "Alara," he said. Not a question, a statement, a claiming. Her name on his lips felt like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. She started, but her voice failed her. "A year ago," he continued, his tone quiet but absolute, meant only for her, though the entire room strained to hear. "You found a man bleeding in an alley off 9th Avenue. It was raining. You gave him your last $20 and stayed with him until the ambulance came. You told him a story about your grandmother to keep him conscious. Do you remember?" The memory surfaced, hazy and distant. A man slumped against a dumpster, blood soaking through his shirt, his face obscured by shadow and rain. She'd been walking home from her shift at the diner, and she'd stopped because no one else had. She'd called 911, used her tip money to buy gauze and antiseptic from the 24-hour pharmacy, and talked to him about her grandmother's garden until she heard sirens. She'd never seen his face clearly. She'd never asked his name. I remember," she whispered. Something in his severe expression softened, just a fraction. I have been looking for you ever since." Behind him, Bianca made a strangled sound of disbelief. Kenji's eyes flickered toward her with the casual disinterest of a man noticing an insect. When he spoke again, his voice had gone cold, stripped of the warmth he'd used with Alara. "You told her she was unwanted," he said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The words fell like a death sentence. "You made a mistake." He turned back to Alara, and his hand came up, large, calloused, steady, palm open in offering. "Come with me," he said simply. "You will never be unwanted again." It was a choice, a door opening. Behind her lay a life of shadows and shame, of making herself small so others could feel large. Before her stood a man who'd spent a year searching for her, a man whose world was dangerous and dark, but who looked at her like she was something precious. Alara's hand, trembling and small, rose to meet his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm, and the moment their skin touched, she felt it. A jolt of recognition, of rightness, of a future reshaping itself around this single point of contact. Kenji pulled her gently forward, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm and drawing her against his side. The solid wall of his body was a fortress. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the frozen crowd, over Bianca's horrified face and Renee's slack-jawed shock, and began to walk. No one moved to stop them. No one dared. As they crossed the ballroom together, Alara didn't look back. For the first time in her life, she didn't need to. The elevator doors closed behind them with a whisper of finality, sealing them away from the glittering chaos of the gala. Alara's hand was still tucked into the crook of Kenji's arm, and she could feel the coiled tension in his muscles beneath the expensive fabric of his suit, a predator at rest, but never truly relaxed. The silence between them hummed with unspoken questions. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished chrome walls. She looked different. Her dark skin glowed against the teal silk, her natural hair styled in soft waves that framed her face. But it was her eyes that caught her attention. They were wide, pupils dilated, caught between fear and something dangerously close to exhilaration. Next to her, Kenji was a study in controlled power, his pale gray eyes fixed on the descending numbers above the door. "Where are we going?" Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Somewhere you can breathe." His accent was subtle, a faint Korean inflection that rounded certain vowels, made certain consonants sharper. "Somewhere they cannot reach you." The elevator opened into an underground garage, and Alara's breath caught. A sleek black car waited, its engine already purring. Two men in dark suits flanked it, their postures military precise. They didn't look at her, but she felt their awareness, their instant cataloging of her presence. Kenji guided her forward, his hand moving to the small of her back. The touch burned through the thin silk, brand hot and possessive. He opened the rear door himself, a gesture that felt both chivalrous and deeply territorial. She hesitated at the threshold. This was the moment. Once she got into this car, there would be no going back to her small apartment, her quiet life, but her carefully maintained invisibility. "You're afraid," Kenji observed, his voice low. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "Good. Fear means you understand the weight of this choice." "What choice?" she whispered. "You haven't asked me anything." Something flickered in those winter ice eyes, approval, perhaps, or respect. "You're right." He reached up, his fingers ghosting along her jawline with a tenderness that seemed at odds with everything she knew about him. "Will you come with me, Alara? Will you let me show you who you really are?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. In the distance, she could hear the muffled sounds of the gala, the life she was leaving behind. Bianca's voice echoed in her memory. "You are unwanted here." But this man, this dangerous, impossible man had spent a year looking for her. "I'll come," she said. The smile that touched his lips was small, barely there, but it transformed his face. He handed her into the car, then slid in beside her. The door closed with the solid thunk of German engineering and absolute security. As the car pulled away, Kenji turned to her. "Do you remember that night? Truly?" Alara closed her eyes, letting the memory surface fully for the first time in months. It had been raining, the kind of cold November rain that turned New York streets into rivers of neon reflections. She'd been walking home from her double shift at the diner, her feet aching, her uniform soaked through. The shortcut through the alley off 9th Avenue was stupid, dangerous, but she'd been so tired, and it shaved 10 minutes off her walk. She'd almost missed him. Just a shadow slumped against the dumpster, dark on dark. But then she'd seen the blood, black in the dim light, spreading across the wet pavement like spilled ink. "Hey!" She'd dropped to her knees beside him, ignoring the cold water soaking through her jeans. "Hey, can you hear me?" His eyes had opened, pale, unfocused, fighting against the pull of unconsciousness. He'd tried to speak, but only blood bubbled past his lips. She'd pulled out her phone, dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "I need an ambulance. 9th Avenue between 42nd and 43rd. Man with a stab wound, looks like he's lost a lot of blood." While she waited, she'd pressed her scarf against the wound in his side, applying pressure like she'd learned in the mandatory first aid course at the diner. He'd made a sound, low and pained. "Stay with me," she'd murmured. "Help is coming." "Just stay with me." His hand had found hers, gripping with surprising strength. She'd held on, talking to him, anything to keep him conscious. "My grandmother used to have a garden," she'd said, her voice soft in the rain. "In Jamaica, before she came here. She grew everything, mangoes, ackee, callaloo. She used to say that anything could grow if you gave it enough love and patience, even in concrete." The sirens had been approaching, but they felt too far away. She'd squeezed his hand. "You're going to make it. Do you hear me? You're going to make it because I'm not going to let you die in this alley. You're worth more than that." When the paramedics arrived, they'd tried to pull her away, but he'd held onto her hand. One of them, a woman with kind eyes, had seen the blood soaking Alara's clothes and assumed she'd been attacked too. "I'm fine," Alara had insisted. "Take care of him, please." She'd watched them load him into the ambulance, and then she'd walked the rest of the way home, shivering and blood-stained, and tried not to think about whether he'd survive the night. "I remember," Alara said, opening her eyes to find Kenji watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I never knew if you made it. I called the hospital the next day, but they wouldn't tell me anything about patients." "I made it." His hand found hers in the darkness of the car, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. The wound was deep. Another 5 minutes and I would have bled out. You saved my life, Alara. You were just a person who needed help. I was a dead man, he corrected, his voice rough. I'd been left there to die by people who thought they could take what was mine. You didn't know me. You didn't know what I was. You just saw someone in pain and decided they were worth saving. She looked down at their joined hands, her brown skin against his pale, calloused fingers. Anyone would have done the same. No. The word was absolute. 37 people walked past me that night before you came. I counted them. 37 people saw me and decided I was someone else's problem. But you stopped. You gave me your scarf, your time, your kindness. When the paramedics asked for your name, you were already gone. I had to get to work the next morning. You also spent your tip money on antibiotics and gauze at the 24-hour pharmacy before you called 911. The owner showed me the security footage. You were soaked, shivering, clearly exhausted. And you spent money you couldn't afford to spare on a stranger bleeding out in an alley. Alara felt heat creep up her neck. She'd forgotten about that, the quick stop at the pharmacy, because she'd known the ambulance would take time and he'd needed something, anything, to help staunch the bleeding. I couldn't just leave you there to die. But you could have. Most people would have. That difference, Alara, that choice you made, is why I spent 300 days searching for you. It's why I will burn down anyone who makes you feel small or unwanted. Because you are the rarest thing in my world, someone who gives without calculating the cost. The car slowed, turning into an underground garage that looked nothing like the one they'd left. This one was sleek, modern, with security that would make a government facility jealous. While armed men nodded as their car passed, their respect palpable even through tinted windows. This is your world, Alara said quietly, taking it all in. This is one piece of it. Kenji's voice was careful, measured. I won't lie to you about what I am or what I do. I'm not a good man by most definitions. The things I've done to build this empire would keep you awake at night. But I will never lie to you, and I will never let anyone hurt you again. The car stopped. Kenji exited first, then extended his hand to help her out. She took it, stepping onto the concrete in her delicate heels, and looked up. They were in the private garage of what appeared to be a luxury building, all glass and steel reaching toward the night sky. But it was the way Kenji's men watched them, watched her, that made Alara's stomach flutter. They looked at her the way someone might look at a queen. Come, Kenji said, his hand settling on her lower back again, that possessive touch that made her nerve endings sing. We have much to discuss, and you deserve to hear it all before you make your final choice. The penthouse elevator required a key Kenji produced from his jacket, a small black card that looked more like a weapon than an access device. As they ascended, Alara watched the city fall away beneath them, lights stretching out in an endless grid. She'd lived in New York her entire life, but she'd never seen it from this height, from this perspective of absolute power. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse, and Alara's breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around 3 sides of the space, are offering a panoramic view that made the city look like a jewel box spilled across black velvet. The interior was minimalist but warm, dark wood, soft leather, and subtle lighting that created pockets of intimacy in the vast space. But what struck her most was the art on the walls. Original pieces, she realized, not reproductions. A Basquiat, a Kehinde Wiley portrait, an Amy Sherald that made her throat tight. You collect black artists, she said, moving toward the Sherald as if pulled by gravity. I collect truth, Kenji replied, shrugging off his jacket. Beneath it, his black shirt pulled taut across his shoulders, the fabric whispering against his skin as he moved. These artists see the world as it is, not as people pretend it to be. That has value beyond money. He crossed to a bar cart, his movements fluid and economical. We drink? Water, please. Her head was already spinning. She didn't need alcohol to compound it. He poured sparkling water over ice, added a twist of lemon, and brought it to her. Their fingers brushed as she took the glass, and that electric charge sparked again, stronger this time. His pale eyes held hers, and she saw hunger there, carefully leashed but unmistakable. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a deep leather sofa positioned to face the windows. "Please." Alara sat, the teal silk pooling around her legs. Kenji settled beside her, close but not touching. The space between them felt charged, heavy with possibility. "You want to know why I'm really here," she said. It wasn't a question. "I want you to understand what you're choosing." He turned to face her, one arm draped along the back of the sofa. "Tonight, when I walked into that ballroom and saw your cousins humiliating you, I wanted to kill them. Not as a metaphor. I mean, I wanted to paint that marble floor with their blood." His voice was conversational, almost gentle, which made the words more terrifying. Alara's hands tightened on her glass. "But you didn't. Because that's not what you would want. And what you want, Alara, has become more important to me than my own instincts." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "Do you understand what I'm telling you? In the year I spent searching for you, you became my obsession. Not because I owe you a debt, though I do, but because in a world of transactional relationships and calculated cruelty, you were genuine. You were kind without audience. And I have built my life on being able to read people, ways to see their angles and their lies. But you had no angle. You just helped." "I'm not special," Alara protested. "I'm just... Don't." The word cracked like a whip. Kenji's eyes flashed, that careful control slipping for just a moment. "Don't repeat the lies they taught you. You are special, Alara. You are rare. And the fact that you cannot see it makes you even more valuable." He stood, prowling to the windows, his shoulders tight with tension. Against the city lights, he looked like something carved from shadow and starlight, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. "Your family has been stealing from you," he said without preamble. Alara blinked. "What?" "Your father, your biological father, left you a trust fund when he died. Substantial. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life, to pursue any dream you wanted. Your stepmother and her family have been keeping it from you. They've been collecting the interest, using it to fund their lifestyle while telling you that your father left nothing but debt." The words landed like physical blows. Alara set down her glass before she could drop it. "How do you—" "I know everything, Alara." Kenji turned to face her, backlit by the city. "Once I knew your name, I had my people dig into every corner of your life. The trust exists. The paperwork is ironclad. They've been committing fraud for 8 years, banking on the fact that you'd never question their story because you were too beaten down to fight." Rage, hot and foreign, bubbled up in Alara's chest. All those years working double shifts, wearing thrift store clothes, or eating ramen for dinner while Bianca and Renee flaunted their designer wardrobes and exotic vacations. All of it built on her money. Her father's love made manifest in a legacy they'd stolen. "I want it back," she said, her voice shaking. "I want to make them pay." Kenji's smile was sharp, predatory. He crossed back to her, crouching in front of the sofa so they were eye level. His hands found her knees, the touch burning through the silk. "Say the word," he murmured, "and I will destroy them. Not quickly, not cleanly. I will take everything they have piece by piece until they understand what it feels like to be unwanted, to be nothing." His hands slid up, bracketing her thighs, his thumbs tracing small circles that made her breath catch. The touch was possessive, claiming, and her body responded in ways she'd never experienced, and heat pooling low in her belly. "But first," he continued, his voice dropping to a dark velvet rumble, "you need to decide. Do you go back to your life, take your trust fund, and walk away from this, from me? Or do you stay? Do you let me show you what you could become if you stopped apologizing for existing?" His face was inches from hers now, his breath ghosting across her lips. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body, see the hunger in his pale eyes, and beneath the hunger something deeper. Need. raw, desperate need. "What would staying mean?" she whispered. "It means you're mine." His hand came up, cupping her face with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the intensity in his eyes. "Not as a possession, as a partner, as the woman who will stand beside me while I build something that will outlast us both. It means I will give you everything you were denied. Power, respect, a throne built on the bones of people who thought you were worthless." His thumb brushed across her full bottom lip, and she shivered. "It also means danger," he continued, his honesty brutal. "My enemies will see you as a weakness. My world is violence and shadow. You would be stepping into darkness, Ilara. Beautiful, seductive darkness, but darkness nonetheless." She should be terrified. Every rational part of her brain was screaming at her to run, to take her trust fund and disappear. But she'd spent her entire life being rational, being quiet, being safe. And where had it gotten her? Humiliated in a ballroom, told she was unwanted, made to feel like a burden. This man, this dangerous, impossible man, looked at her like she was the only source of light in his dark world. "Teach me," she said. His eyes flared. "Teach you what?" "How to be powerful, how to make them sorry, how to stop being the shadow they tried to make me." Kenji's smile was slow, devastating. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear, and when he spoke, his voice was pure sin. "Oh, Ilara, you were never a shadow. You were an eclipse, and I'm going to teach you how to swallow the sun." Kenji stood, pulling Ilara to her feet with an easy strength that reminded her exactly what kind of man he was. But he didn't release her. Instead, his hands settled on her waist, spanning the curve of it with possessive surety. She could feel the heat of his palms through the silk, could feel each individual finger pressed against her as if branding her. "The first lesson," he murmured, his face close enough that she could count the flecks of darker gray in his irises. "Stop making yourself small. You have a habit of it. Folding your shoulders in, ducking your head, taking up as little space as possible. I want you to break that habit." He stepped back but kept his hands on her waist, his gaze traveling down her body in a way that felt almost tangible. "Stand straight, shoulders back." Ilara complied, feeling awkward, exposed. "Look at me." She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes. The approval she saw there sent warmth flooding through her. Better. His hands slid up her sides, over the slope of her waist, tracing the curve of her ribs beneath the silk. The touch was clinical, instructive, but her body didn't care. It responded with a rush of heat that made her breath hitch. "You're beautiful." The Ilara. Objectively. "Your bone structure is exceptional. Your skin is flawless. Your body is strong and curved in all the ways that make men lose their minds. But none of that matters if you don't believe it yourself." He circled her slowly, one hand trailing across her shoulders, her back, reading her body like braille. "Confidence isn't arrogance. It's simply knowing your worth and refusing to accept less. When you walk into a room, you should move like you belong there. Like everyone else is privileged to be in your presence. I can't just—" "You can." He completed the circle, stopping in front of her. "Because it's the truth. You saved my life, Ilara. You saw someone in pain and decided they were worth your time, your money, your compassion. That makes you more powerful than anyone at that gala. The difference is they understand how to wield their power, and you've been taught to bury yours." His hand came up, tilting her chin higher. "Second lesson, eye contact. Never look away first. Not from anyone. You meet their gaze and you hold it until they break. Until they understand that you see them just as clearly as they see you." Ilara forced herself to hold his stare, even though every instinct screamed at her to look away from that predatory intensity. His eyes were like winter storms, beautiful and dangerous, and they saw everything. Every fear, every doubt, every hidden hunger. "Good," he breathed, and she felt the word as much as heard it. "That's very good." He released her, moving to a sleek desk in the corner of the room. When he returned, he carried a folder. "Third lesson, knowledge is ammunition. You cannot fight an enemy you don't understand. He opened the folder, spreading documents across the glass coffee table. Ilara sank back onto the sofa, her eyes scanning the pages. Bank statements, legal documents, emails, all detailing the systematic theft of her inheritance. Your trust was established with $3 million, Kenji said, his voice clinical. With proper investment, it's grown to nearly $5 million. Your stepmother has been taking $200,000 per year in administrative fees. The rest has been sitting in accounts under her control. The numbers swam in front of Ilara's eyes. $5 million, while she'd worked herself to exhaustion for minimum wage and tips. How do we get it back? Her voice was steady, cold. She barely recognized it. Legally or illegally? Kenji asked, a hint of dark humor in his tone. Does it matter? His smile was sharp approval. It matters to you. You're not like me, Ilara. You have lines you don't cross, and I respect that, so we'll do this the right way, mostly. He pulled out another document. We file a lawsuit, expose the fraud. We attach their assets, freeze their accounts. By the time we're done, they'll be drowning in legal fees and public humiliation. But that's not enough, Ilara said, surprising herself. No. Kenji's pale eyes glittered. It's not. Which is why we'll also make sure every social connection they have, every business relationship, every carefully cultivated friendship knows exactly what they did. Your stepmother built her reputation on being a patron of the arts, a philanthropist. Imagine what happens when the world discovers she's been stealing from her own stepdaughter for nearly a decade. The vindictiveness of it should have shocked her. Instead, it felt like justice, like finally being seen. When do we start? We already have. Kenji settled beside her on the sofa, close enough that his thigh pressed against hers. I filed the paperwork 3 days ago, once I confirmed you were the right Ilara. Tomorrow morning, they'll wake up to find their accounts frozen and a summons waiting. By noon, the story will leak to the press. By evening, their world will be on fire. Ilara's hands were shaking. Kenji caught them, encasing them in his larger, calloused palms. Breathe, he instructed. This is just the beginning. Revenge is a feast, and you've been starving. But you need to pace yourself or you'll choke on it. She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. I can't believe this is real. Believe it. He lifted her hand, pressing his lips to her knuckles in a gesture that was courtly, old world, but somehow deeply erotic. You're going to watch them fall, Ilara, and you're going to do it from a position of absolute power. His mouth lingered on her skin, his breath warm, his eyes never leaving hers. And when they're on their knees, when they're begging, you'll decide how much mercy they deserve. Not me, you. The thought of Bianca begging, of her stepmother's perfectly composed face crumbling, should have brought her satisfaction. Instead, she felt something darker, hungrier. She wanted to see them break. She wanted to watch them realize what they'd created with their cruelty. I want to see their faces, she whispered, when it all comes down. You will. Kenji's voice was a promise. I'll make sure you have a front row seat to their destruction. His hand came up, cupping her face again, and this time when his thumb brushed her lip, it wasn't gentle. It was possessive, claiming a prelude to something more. But tonight you rest. You've been holding yourself together for too long, carrying a weight no one should bear alone. Tonight you let it go. Let me carry it for you. Ilara's eyes stung with sudden tears. No one had ever offered to carry anything for her. She'd always been the one supporting others, the one quietly managing, enduring, surviving. I don't know how, she admitted. I'll show you. He stood, lifting her effortlessly. She gasped, her arms automatically going around his neck. He was solid, warm, his body a wall of controlled strength. This first lesson, he murmured against her hair, is learning to trust, to let someone else be strong when you're tired. He carried her through the penthouse, down a hallway lined with more art, to a bedroom that took her breath away. The bed was enormous, draped in dark silk. More windows framed the city lights, and on the dresser, impossibly, sat a framed photo of a garden, lush, tropical, bursting with life. Is that—" her voice broke. "Your grandmother's garden in Jamaica," Kenji confirmed, setting her gently on her feet. "You described it to me that night in the alley. I had someone track down photos of it before your grandmother sold the property. I thought you should have something of her here." The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Kenji pulled her against his chest. One hand cupping the back of her head, the other splayed across her lower back. He didn't shush her or tell her to stop. He just held her, solid and immovable, while she sobbed out years of loneliness and pain against his expensive shirt. When the storm passed, she pulled back, mortified. "I'm sorry, No apologies." His thumb wiped the tears from her cheeks. "Not for feeling, not ever." He kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we begin rebuilding your world, but tonight you're safe. You're home. Home." The word echoed in her chest, settling somewhere deep and true. This penthouse, this man, this dangerous new life. Somehow, impossibly, it felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever been. 3 months later, Alara woke to winter sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows and the scent of coffee. Dark, rich, the expensive beans Kenji ordered from a roaster in Seoul. She stretched, her body languid against silk sheets that whispered against her bare skin, and smiled. She wasn't the same woman who'd walked out of that gala. That Alara had been a ghost, half-formed, apologizing for her existence. The woman in this bed was solid, real, powerful. The transformation hadn't been overnight. Kenji had been true to his word, methodical and patient. He'd hired tutors to teach her about business, finance, the intricate web of connections that powered his empire. He'd taken her to meetings where men twice her age looked at her with dismissive smirks, until she spoke, demonstrating knowledge they hadn't expected, wielding confidence like a blade. He'd taught her to shoot, too. The feel of a gun in her hand, the controlled violence of it, had been terrifying and exhilarating. She'd learned how to defend herself, how to read a room for threats, how to move through dangerous spaces with the same casual confidence Kenji displayed. But more than the skills, he'd taught her to believe in her own worth. Not through empty affirmations, but through action. He included her in decisions, asked for her opinion, listened when she spoke, treated her like an equal in a world that had always told her she was less than. And somewhere in those 3 months, between late-night conversations and shared meals and the electric tension that hummed between them whenever they were close, she'd fallen irrevocably, desperately in love with him. Alara rose from the bed, Hex pulling on one of Kenji's cashmere sweaters, black, soft, enveloping her in his scent. She padded barefoot through the penthouse, her feet silent on the cool floors. She found him in the kitchen, bare-chested and devastating in low-slung gray sweatpants, his back to her as he poured coffee with the same precision he applied to everything. The scars were visible in the morning light. The one from that night in the alley, a puckered silver mark on his left side, and others scattered across his back. Evidence of a life lived in violence, but they didn't repel her. They were part of who he was, marks of survival and strength. He turned as if sensing her, and the smile that curved his mouth was private, intimate. "Good morning." "Morning." She accepted the mug he offered, their fingers brushing, that familiar spark dancing between them. "You let me sleep in. You were tired. You worked late with the lawyers yesterday." He leaned against the counter, his pale eyes tracking her with that predatory focus she'd come to crave. "Besides, I enjoy watching you sleep. You make these small sounds, soft little sighs." Heat crept up her neck. In 3 months, despite the tension between them, despite the hunger she saw in his eyes, Kenji hadn't pushed. He'd been patient, giving her space to grow into her power without the complication of physical intimacy. But that patience was wearing thin. She could see it in the way he looked at her, the way his hands lingered when he touched her, the carefully controlled restraint that made him even more magnetic. "Today's the day," she said, changing the subject before she did something reckless like close the distance between them and kiss him. "It is." Kenji's expression shifted, becoming harder, colder. "Are you ready?" The lawsuit had been brutal and swift. Kenji's lawyers were merciless, backed by evidence so airtight that her stepmother's legal team had crumbled within weeks. The settlement had been finalized yesterday, full restoration of the trust fund, plus damages, plus legal fees. Her family was financially ruined, but that wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. "I'm ready," Alara confirmed. Kenji moved to the window, his body silhouetted against the morning city. "They'll be here in an hour. We've offered them a deal. I buy their remaining assets at fair market value, which gives them enough to start over somewhere else. Somewhere far from New York, far from the social circles they tried to dominate. But they have to meet with me," Alara finished. "They have to face what they did." "Yes." He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "Last chance to change your mind. You could let me handle this. You never have to see them again." Alara shook her head. "No, I need this. I need them to understand." "Then get dressed," Kenji said, his voice dark velvet. "Show them the queen they tried to keep imprisoned." An hour later, Alara stood in Kenji's office, a room of dark wood and leather, walls lined with books and artifacts from a life she was still learning about. She wore black today, a tailored dress that hugged her curves and made her dark skin glow, her hair pulled back in a sleek style that emphasized her bone structure. Diamond studs, a gift from Kenji, glittered in her ears. She looked like money, like power, like everything they'd tried to deny her. Kenji stood beside his desk, an imposing presence in a charcoal suit, his pale eyes cold and assessing. Two of his men flanked the door. The message was clear. This was his territory, his rules. When the door opened, Alara felt her breath catch. Her stepmother entered first, and the change was shocking. Claire Montgomery had always been impeccably put together, but today she looked diminished. Her designer suit was last season's, her hair less perfectly styled, but it was her eyes that showed the real damage, hollow, desperate, the eyes of someone who'd lost everything. Behind her came Bianca and Renee. Bianca's leather and confidence were gone, replaced by a conservative dress and hunched shoulders. Renee wouldn't meet anyone's gaze, and trailing them, looking as though he wanted to be anywhere else, was Bianca's husband, soon to be ex-husband, according to Kenji's intel. They stopped just inside the office, a small, defeated cluster. Claire's eyes found Alara, and shock rippled across her features. "Alara, you look..." "Different?" Alara supplied, her voice cool. She walked to Kenji's desk, leaning against it casually, a power position they'd practiced. "I had a good teacher." Bianca's gaze darted to Kenji, and Alara saw fear there, raw and absolute. "Good." "Please sit," Kenji said, gesturing to the chairs arranged in front of his desk. It wasn't really an invitation. They sat, and the power dynamic was painfully clear. They were supplicants now, begging for mercy from the woman they'd spent years crushing beneath their heels. "You stole from me," Alara said without preamble. For 8 years you took what my father left me and used it to fund your lifestyle while I worked myself to exhaustion, while you told me I was worthless, that I didn't belong, that no one wanted me." Claire's hands twisted in her lap. "Alara, if you would just let me explain—" "No!" The word cracked like a whip. Alara felt Kenji's presence behind her, solid and supporting. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to make excuses. You get to sit there and listen while I tell you exactly what your cruelty cost me." The room was silent, except for the city sounds filtering through the windows, distant traffic, the hum of life continuing far below. "I was 15 when my father died," Alara continued, her voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath. "I was grieving, lost, and you told me I was a burden. You made me believe I was lucky you didn't throw me out on the street. You worked me like a servant in my own home, and all the while you were stealing money my father set aside to make sure I'd be safe, that I'd have opportunities, that I'd be loved even after he was gone." A tear tracked down Claire's cheek, but Alara felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, just a hollow kind of completion. At that gala, Alara said, shifting her attention to Bianca. You told me I was unwanted. You said I was an embarrassment. You pointed your finger at me like I was garbage and told me I didn't belong. Bianca's face crumbled. I'm sorry. God, Alara, I'm so sorry. I was jealous. You were cruel, Alara interrupted. And that cruelty revealed exactly who you are. Not the sophisticated socialite you pretended to be, just a small, insecure woman who needed to make others feel worthless to feel powerful herself. She straightened, and suddenly she was looking down at them, literally and figuratively. Here's what's going to happen. Mr. Sato has offered to purchase your remaining assets at fair market value. It's more than generous given your situation. You'll sign the papers today. You'll take the money and leave New York. You'll start over somewhere else with no help from the connections you spent years cultivating. Because all those people know what you did. They know you're thieves and liars. Claire made a small, broken sound. Renee was openly crying. And if any of you ever speak my name again, Ilara continued, her voice dropping to something cold and final, if you ever try to contact me, if you ever tell your version of this story to anyone, Mr. Sato will make your lives infinitely more difficult than they already are. Do you understand? 3 heads nodded, defeated. Kenji moved then, sliding a stack of documents across the desk. Sign, he said simply. They signed. Quickly, desperately, their hands shaking as they scrawled their names on pages they barely read. When it was done, Kenji's men collected the documents, and Claire looked up at Alara one last time. I am sorry, she whispered. For what it's worth, I am truly sorry. Alara met her gaze, held it, and felt nothing but a clean, cold emptiness where rage and hurt had lived for so long. It's not worth anything, she said. Not anymore. They left, escorted out by Kenji's men, and the silence they left behind was profound. Alara stood at the window, watching the city, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. She felt Kenji approach before she saw him, his presence a warmth at her back. How do you feel? He asked quietly. Empty. She turned to face him. I thought it would feel good watching them break, but it just feels hollow. That's because revenge doesn't actually heal anything. His hand came up, cupping her face. It just makes space for healing to begin. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. Thank you for all of this. I did nothing but give you the tools. His thumb stroked her cheekbone. You're the one who wielded them. You're the one who stood here and faced them without flinching. That was all you, Alara. When she opened her eyes, she found him watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. The careful distance he'd maintained for 3 months had evaporated, leaving only hunger, raw and barely controlled. Kenji, she breathed. Tell me to leave, he said, his voice rough. Tell me you need space and I'll go, but if you don't... She kissed him, rose on her toes and pressed her mouth to his, swallowing whatever he'd been about to say. For a heartbeat, he froze, shocked. Then his control shattered. His arms came around her, crushing her against him, and he kissed her back with a ferocity that made her knees weak. His mouth was demanding, claiming, his tongue sliding against hers in a rhythm that promised darker pleasures. She made a sound, desperate and hungry, and he growled, actually growled, before lifting her and setting her on the desk. His hands found her thighs, spreading them so he could step between them. And suddenly there was no space between them at all. Just heat and hunger and the frantic need to get closer. His mouth moved to her neck, finding that sensitive spot beneath her ear, and she gasped, her fingers tangling in his hair. 3 months, he muttered against her skin, his voice wrecked. 3 months of watching you, wanting you, trying to be patient. Don't be patient anymore, she demanded, tugging his hair to bring his mouth back to hers. I don't want patient. I want you. The kiss that followed was pure possession, deep and consuming. His hands roamed her body, mapping curves through expensive fabric, and she could feel his restraint fraying with every passing second. A knock at the door froze them both. Kenji pulled back, his eyes dilated, his breathing ragged. "What?" he barked. "Sorry, boss," came a voice from the other side. "The accountant is here for the 2 o'clock. Kenji closed his eyes, clearly wrestling with himself. When he opened them again, they were still hungry but more controlled. 10 minutes, he called back. He looked at Alara, his hands still on her thighs, and the promise in his gaze made heat pool low in her belly. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight I'm taking you to dinner, somewhere beautiful, and then I'm bringing you home and you're going to stop being patient," Alara finished, her voice husky. His smile was pure sin. "Yes, exactly that." The restaurant was stunning, perched on the top floor of a building that made Kenji's penthouse look modest, with views of the city that stretched to the horizon. But Alara barely tasted her food. She was too aware of Kenji across the table, the way his eyes tracked her every movement. Was the tension coiling tighter with each passing minute? They barely spoke. Words felt unnecessary, inadequate for what was humming between them. When they finally returned to the penthouse, Kenji's control was hanging by a thread. He poured them each a drink, whiskey smooth and expensive, and they stood at the windows watching the city lights. "I've been thinking about that night," Alara said quietly. "The night I found you in the alley." Kenji turned to her, waiting. "I've replayed it 1,000 times since I learned who you were, and I keep wondering, what if I'd walked past like everyone else? What if I'd been too scared or too tired? But you didn't." His hand found hers, their fingers interlacing. "You stopped. You saved me. And everything that's happened since, everything you've become, it all started in that moment." She set down her glass, turning to face him fully. "I was so broken when you found me at that gala, so convinced I was worthless. And you looked at me like I was the most valuable thing in the world." "Because you are." He set down his own glass, his hands settling on her waist. "To me, you are everything." The declaration hung between them, stark and absolute. Alara felt her eyes sting. "I love you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could overthink them. "I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but I love you. You've given me back myself, and I—" He kissed her, cutting off the rambling confession. This kiss was different from the one in his office, deeper, slower, weighted with emotion rather than just hunger. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. "I have loved you since the moment you pressed that scarf to my wound and told me I was going to make it," he murmured. "I have loved you through every day of searching. I have loved you through watching you transform from shadow to sunlight. And I will love you until my last breath leaves my body." The tears came then, happy and overwhelming. He kissed them away, his lips gentle on her cheeks, her eyelids, the tip of her nose. "Take me to bed," she whispered. He did. Lifted her into his arms like she weighed nothing and carried her down the hallway to his bedroom. Their bedroom now, she realized. He set her on her feet beside the bed, his hands moving to the zipper of her dress with reverent slowness. "Tell me what you want," he said, his voice rough with barely controlled need. Everything." She looked up at him, holding his winter storm gaze. "I want everything, Kenji. All of you. No more patience. No more holding back." His control snapped. The dress pooled at her feet, and his hands were everywhere, learning her, claiming her, worshipping her. She tugged at his shirt, needing to feel his skin against hers, needing the connection that had been building for 3 months to finally break. When they finally came together, it was both gentle and fierce, tender and possessive. He moved above her, inside her, and she felt completed in a way she'd never experienced. This wasn't just physical. It was the joining of two people who'd found each other in darkness and decided to create their own light. Afterwards, tangled in silk sheets with the city glittering beyond the windows, Alara traced the scar on Kenji's side, the one she'd helped save his life over. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "That night? If you'd known everything that would happen?" "I regret nothing." He caught her hand, pressing it over his heart. That night put me on the path to you. Every moment since has been worth it." She smiled, content and complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. "I used to think I was unwanted, that I was a burden, a mistake. And now? Now I know I'm a queen." She looked up at him, seeing herself reflected in his eyes, powerful, loved, home. "Your queen." His smile was slow, devastating. "My queen," he agreed, pulling her closer. "My salvation, my everything." Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, but inside, in this moment, they were everything. Two broken pieces that had found each other and chosen to become whole. Alara had spent years being told she didn't belong anywhere. Now, wrapped in Kenji's arms with his heartbeat steady beneath her palm, she finally understood the truth. She'd always belonged. She'd just been waiting for someone to see her worth. And he had. The ghost of Soul, the most dangerous man in America, had looked at a woman bleeding out her kindness in a cruel world and decided she was worth spending 300 days to find. She thought about Bianca's face when she'd seen them together at the gala, the shock and confusion. She thought about her stepmother signing those papers with shaking hands. And she felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just peace. Because this, lying in Kenji's arms, be safe and loved and powerful, this was what victory actually looked like. Not revenge, not destruction, but the quiet, profound knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. "What are you thinking?" Kenji murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her spine. "That I used to be afraid of the dark," she said. "But you taught me that darkness is just where the stars shine brightest." He pulled her closer, his lips finding her temple. "Sleep, my love. Tomorrow we start building our empire. Together." As Alara drifted off, cocooned in warmth and safety and love, she smiled. She'd walked out of that gala 3 months ago a shadow, but she'd always been gold. She'd just needed someone to polish away the layers of cruelty and neglect to reveal what had been there all along. And now, finally, she shone.